I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and we're coming off a Monday pod in which we went 3-4 against the spread, but we're still kicking at 22-15 overall in the play-in/playoffs. Combine that with a 34-19-1 record overall for the NBA picks. Things are still rolling. So we move on and we got the Heat and Hawks. That series is done as Miami wins 3-1. As mentioned on the pod, I gave out -7 for the Heat, and then Jimmy Butler doesn't play. Heat end up winning the game anyways without Kyle Lowry and without Jimmy Butler. They win 97-94, and they will move on to play the winner of the Raptors and Sixers series. And I mean, from a Raptors standpoint, a lot of storylines there. And from the Sixers standpoint, I mean, there's becoming a lot of storylines there as well. The Sixers lead the series 3-2, but the Raps are on the comeback trail here as they win Game 5 in Philadelphia in a blowout, 103-88. I was on the Sixers, and watching that game, I'll say this, that looks like a team that is ready to blow it. They did not come out with any type of intensity, with any type of team with urgency at all. They just thought, it's like they thought, okay, Fred VanVleet's out, the Raps are just going to roll over. I don't know what their game plan was, or what Doc's speech was, or what Embiid's speech was, or what James Harden's doing. That just looked like a team that is ready to blow it. And as you head into a Game 6 Thursday night, Philly is favored by -1.5 in Toronto. And I have no idea how I could possibly say that I'm going to be on the Philadelphia 76ers on the road in Toronto after watching what they just did at home. I would be stunned. And this is not to say that Philly can't win. I'm just telling you, I'd be stunned if Philadelphia won this game tonight. So of course I got to be on the Raps in this game. That's just my eyes. And maybe I'm overreacting to what I just saw, but I'm okay to take that L if the Sixers win in Game 6 in Toronto. I will tip my cap to Joel Embiid and company.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. But listen, we finally got you, right? We finally got the crown prince of Raptors Twitter and Raptors post-game podcasts and whatnot.
Yes.
We finally got you to believe, right? Because you'll recall your boy over here was on the Raptors in Game 4. Your boy over here was on Raptors in Game 5. We hopped in the time machine, right? We hopped in the time machine to grab all of our profits from Game 4 and throw them on the Raptors, 17-1, 22-1 that were out there to win this series. Now, again, we haven't actually won that bet yet, right? But we, as you mentioned, it's really hard to imagine that the Raptors don't win this game tonight. And the hard part, if you will, was winning that Game 5 because, listen, a couple of things before the series started. We needed the Raptors to win a game in Philadelphia, right? So the idea okay, home court advantage for Philadelphia is going to make it impossible for the Raptors to win. That goes against where our belief was before the series started. So yeah, we would have liked them to take one of two, initially. And unfortunately, because they lost in Game 3 in that catastrophe, it meant that they have to now win 2 road games. But the other element was we want this series to go as long as possible because the longer it goes, a couple of different things happens. One, Nick Nurse gets to do his magic over Glenn Rivers, PhD. And then the other thing is, obviously, it's Joel Embiid, right? And whether it's an injury or whether it's exhaustion and having to deal with the Raptors and their defense over the course of 7 games, right? The longer the series goes, the better the better the Raptors have a chance to, I don't think that's even a sentence, the better chance the Raptors have to befuddle Embiid, right? To be a problem for him. James Harden, right? You and I have been seeing through this all along. But the interesting thing to me here, and when we talk about this going, okay, well, what has changed from game to game or sort of the evolution of this series? And to me, you mentioned Fred VanVleet. And it's funny, right? Because we talk about a Trae Young, for example, and there being a bad matchup for a guy like him in that Miami series, right? And you go, okay, they're going to have a real problem here because of the perimeter defenders that the Heat can throw out. This is almost a bad matchup for Fred VanVleet in this series, I'm thinking. And this sort of forced adjustment that they have to have without Van Fleet is actually working to the benefit. Now, part of that is Scotty Barnes gets to actually play after not playing in basically 2.5 games in this series. And so you have, I mean, the reason they drafted Scotty Barnes was like, okay, this guy can play center, this guy can play point guard and everywhere in between. And now they get to use him sort of full time here with Van Fleet being out. Now, he would be important in a series against Miami, for example, or whatever, but he's actually kind of expendable here. And I'm going to explain why. Because as much as we look at Embiid and we go, okay, like he's dominant, blah, 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 when healthy, all of that sort of thing. And James Harden gets all of the attention. And of course, we all worry about Thibault and like him, he's in the lineup, he's not in the lineup. And Tobias Harris, every once in a while, he shows up. To me, the player that makes the Sixers dangerous, that makes them a good team is Tyrese Maxey. And you saw that in game one where he throws down a 38-point performance, 23 in game two. And you go, okay, if you're going to get 38 from Maxey and you're going to get 23, you're like, this is just going to be, ball game here, right? Like there's only so much the Raptors can do if the supporting cast, the bus passengers, if you will, are doing that type of work out there. And so when you're Nick Nurse, you have to sit back and you go, okay, what do we do about the Maxey issue? And it's not necessarily about defending him. What do you do at any point when a guy is beating you on offense, Shall? You make him play defense, right? You try to tire him out on the other end of the court. And so what they've done here is, because Van Fleet isn't able to play, they have no choice but to put all of the 6'8" guys out on the court at the same time. It's like almost stumbling into a successful 5-man unit. Now it's a 5-man unit that has, because the Raptors are so deep from that standpoint, has 6, 7, even 8 guys that they can sort of rotate through. And what that happens, two things. Well, one, defensively, that length is just, and it was always going to be a problem for everybody other than Joel Embiid. Now, Embiid ends up, whether you want to call him 90%, 80% of himself, whatever, he can't shoot from distance. And the Raptors know that, and they know that he has to drive, which makes things even a little bit easier for them defensively. Or the fact that, listen, they figured out how to guard Harden, right? They realize, I think they literally do in the drills where, your coach would force your hands behind your back. Everybody would have their hands tied behind their back and it would force you to play with your feet and play with your chest. That's what they're doing with Harden, right? They're allowing him to come in. They refuse to foul him, right? And they're going to make him make these off-balance layups and floaters and all of that sort of James Harden stuff that a lot of the time he's going to miss because he's going to get fouled and he's going to accumulate all kinds of points at the free throw line. But the big thing on offense for the Raptors is they just search out whoever Maxey is guarding, because he at 6'3", 6'4" is going to have trouble against anyone on the court, and it doesn't matter who. And so you see Siakam get the ball at the top of the key, and you're like, man, Siakam's like essentially kind of starting the offense from the top of the key. And it's like, yeah, because they can just point out, okay, boom, who is it? Is it Precious who's getting guarded by Maxey? Is it Barnes who's getting guarded by Maxey? And they do one of two things. They either just throw a lob up to whomever Maxey's guarding, because that player can be in the middle of the key, or they just put him in a ball screen and they switch him. And now you have a 6'8", 6'9", 6'10" guy, or in the case of Siakam, basically an all NBA player going up against a guard. And so that takes out this whole like Thibault defensive stopper like type of thing, where it's like, it doesn't matter, because whoever Thibault's just going to stand there guarding somebody else while we put Maxey in one-on-one situations against guys who are much taller than him, right? And again, whether that's a lob situation down low or in a ball screen. And the thing is, like, what's going to change about that? Nothing, right? The Sixers are just going to take Maxey out of the game and put who in? Because this team isn't deep at all, especially in Toronto when Thibault doesn't get to play. Now, speaking of which, like, where was he in game 5, right? 14 minutes, 2 points. Like, I'm not exactly shaking in my boots here when Thibault's out on the court, because again, offensively, the Raptors have figured out a way around what the Sixers do well. And they're basically on defense just saying, okay, like, we don't have a big guy. We don't have, the Marc Gasols of the world to guard Joel Embiid. But you know what? We're going to take our chances that a hampered Joel Embiid, however injured he actually is, isn't going to score 40 isn't going to score 50 and carry this team. Like, good for him and kudos to him for playing through whatever injury he has. But 25 points, when you look around at the rest of the lineup with a basically borderline on his way to being washed up James Harden and a Tyrese Maxey who's getting like, what's the shooting percentage that Maxey would have that's going to outweigh the liability that he is defensively? Right? Like, that doesn't exist. He's giving up a ton of points per possession when he is getting involved defensively, which the Raptors are slowing the game down. You can watch, they can literally watch them. They'll get the ball over half court. They'll pass it mostly to Siakam, but also to Barnes, and they'll stop everything. And they'll go, okay, where is Maxey? Right. And they literally say like, okay, everybody organize. Right. And that's why these unders, I think, are also an interesting bet in these series. But honestly, we're so deep into the weeds far as the Raptors coming back to at least force a game 7. I'll obviously evaluate that, maybe take some money off my position of this Raptors team at 22-1, and having rolled over the winnings from game 4. I'll take, I'll step back, but like, what's the point spread going to be in that game 7, right? And again, we're not going to have a conversation about this, about a game 7, because it's going to happen this weekend. Again, knock on wood that the Raptors actually win this game tonight. But like, what could that possibly be? Because it's not going to be 8 anymore, right? We talked about it on Monday. That 8 number was just like the craziest number ever, right? That was Joel Embiid healthy, like all of this other stuff type of a number. Because I'm just looking at this, I'm like, the first guy off the bench is George Niang. Right. And I'm like, I'm not worried about George Niang. Right. And if we can close out here on Danny Green 3-pointers, who seems like he's the only guy somewhat dangerous from the perimeter. Again, like, what's Glenn Rivers going to do? Right? Is he going to go zone and dare the Raptors to beat him that way? Like, I don't know that you can go 48 minutes of zone against a team in the NBA these days. So, what's the line going to be? Is it going to be back to the 4.5 that it was in game 1? Because to me, that's where it kind of has to be, because 8 and 7.5 and all of this stuff just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And so I don't even really understand necessarily why the Raptors aren't favored in this game. Like, I think to me, that's just complete ignorance of what has happened throughout this season from an adjustment standpoint on these coaching staffs. And you mentioned Doc Rivers making comments, right? It's the same thing as Joel Embiid talking about how Nick Nurse needs to stop complaining about the officiating, and then immediately in the next game starts complaining about the officiating. It's the first sign of panic. And Nick Nurse had every right to be panicked because, 1, the officiating was a farce in those first 2 games. And 2, without Scotty Barnes being the key piece in all of this, right? A guy who can handle the ball well enough to play point guard in this lineup. Like, yeah, I'd be panicked too if I was Nick Nurse after game 2. But I would be panicked right now if I was Glenn Rivers, PhD, after game 5, because I think you're right. I think the Raptors are going to win this series.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if this gets to game 7, I have no idea what's going to happen in a game 7, just based off of, again, we have NBA referees in a Philly home crowd in a game 7 with, yeah, anyways, I'm not even going to go that far down that lane. But my point being, like, this game right now, I just can't see the Sixers winning that game. And then the other part is going into a game 7, the Sixers, they're already tight. You could see that in a game 5. In terms of this actual game though, the couple things benefiting the Raptors was they played Philly late in the season twice without Fred VanVleet, who, there's a lot of slander. And even in like Raptors Twitter world, there's a lot of talk about, oh, Fred was playing so bad anyways. It's like, Fred's been hurt since the All-Star break. Right. And so like, he's been trying to play, but he's been hobbled and not playing as well. So yes, the matchup against Fred VanVleet in this series is bad, but even worse is the matchup against a hobbled Fred VanVleet. And so him trying to like tough it out,
sure,
right, was just a liability on the floor before he was able to not walk. Because Maxey, like, Fred VanVleet's a good on-ball defender. He can guard Maxey straight up, whatever, but hobbled, no chance. Sure. And we saw that in the first couple of games, right? So you remove that, you get Scotty Barnes back, and the Raps are used to playing that way. Why? Because again, Fred VanVleet missed a bunch of games down the stretch. Yeah. So that's the thing that definitely helps the Raps. In terms of the Sixers, I mean, Doc Rivers, we know there's not going to be a lot of adjustments, and you just watch that game 5 and there's a lot of just standing around. And I mean, I get what Joel Embiid's skill set is, and I'm definitely going to sound like the old man, get off my lawn here, but like, the biggest guy on the floor by a lot I'm not giving him the ball at the top of the key at the 3-point line every time down the floor and having the 4 other guys stand around and just watch him. Like those were their plays. It just made no sense to me. So I don't know what the adjustment's going to be if you're Doc, but his clips tell me that he is already nervous when you're bringing up your Orlando Magic team and what that roster was. Joel Embiid talking about how, it's not my job to tell James Harden he needs to shoot more. That's on the coach. Like I've told him that already. The way the Sixers win this game, it's the only way they win is if the refs come out and do what the refs do, which doesn't really make sense for them on the road. But if Joel Embiid and or James Harden come out and just have like the performance that on paper you would expect them to have. I'm not saying in reality, I'm saying on paper that we're told these guys are superstars. Your superstars come out and win you road games in the playoffs. And that's the only way I see the Sixers winning this game 6. And I'm talking like monster Joel Embiid turning into, I always like to say 2000 Shaq 40 and 20 type stat line. Only way I see the Sixers winning. And there's nothing to show me that that's a thing.
Yeah, and a non-mangled hand, Joel Embiid could do that, right? But like, again, whether it's Nick Nurse making a figurative bet or us making a literal bet, like we all will collectively bet against that with his hand, right? And you can, if Doc Rivers wants to put him up at the top of the key, knowing that the Raptors know that they are completely fine with him just taking outside shots with a mangled hand, right? Like, again, it's impressive that Embiid can even get 20 points with the Raptors knowing everything that they need, that they know about Embiid and where he is, right? And like
he said that as well, right? He's said in the presser, he's like, with the way that they're playing me, like James has to shoot more, right? And it's just a weird thing to see. And Doc Rivers, of all the coaches you could possibly have to think about what the adjustment could be, I mean, I would actually consider playing a lot more zone and forcing the Raptors because they will fall into that trap where they just settle for a lot of threes and they're not actually like that good of a 3-point shooting team.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So like, it's an interesting thing. And I'm saying and especially without Fred VanVleet, who's probably their best 3-point shooter, but it's just a weird thing for me. If I look at that and it just takes a lot of adjustments. It's going to be, you know what it is for the Sixers to win this game in Toronto. It's going to have to be a lot of things counter to everything that we've seen before from Doc, from James Harden and Joel Embiid. And like, I don't know. That Raptors crowd is going to be insane too. Like that's
for sure. Well, so here's the thing, you and I talked about it with Bill Self, right? Bill Self wins the 2nd national title and it's like, he's, ready for the Mount Rushmore or whatever. And you go like, I didn't even really love how he coached in that championship game. And we referred to like Andy Reid, who wins a Super Bowl and all of a sudden, like he gets sort of carte blanche to do whatever he wants for the next few years. And we forget about the 20 years before that. Like Glenn Rivers is absolutely that dude, right? Like did not, he references the Magic teams, right? And it was like always underperforming with the Tracy McGrady's of the world, right? And he goes to Boston and I'll never forget, right? Like Bill Simmons, obviously noted Boston super fan, right? Would always make fun of Doc Rivers. And then all of a sudden he gets Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce together, right? And then they win the title. And now like Glenn Rivers basically gets to write a ticket to wherever he wants to go, where at the start of the postseason, people were talking about him going to the Lakers, right? Like the Lakers were going to pry him out of Philadelphia. Well, the other stuff, the other element to this is whether it's the fans in Philadelphia or again, the quotes that are coming out of the locker room, Glenn Rivers is out of there, right? Like he is going to get ridden out by a rail, even if they end up winning this series, because the reality is probably going to lose the next one against the Heat, right? And so if the players don't even really think that this guy is going to be around, like that's not really a great sign either when it comes to Philadelphia's chances. So he's getting, again, we're at over a decade of credit for winning with the Celtics team that was loaded, that was put together for the purposes of winning a championship.
And they only got one.
And by the way, yes, they only did get one, right? Which you could make the case is an underperformance over the course of his tenure. So, we don't even have to get into the Clippers tenure. So yeah, just wild to me here. But I listen, and then if the Raptors can pull this off and we end up cashing, what is effectively a 22-1 bet, I don't care what happens the rest of this NBA playoffs, right? Because we'll be sitting really pretty for on the ledger, so to speak.
Yeah, again, like I'll be like completely stunned if somehow I was about to call them the Clippers because I mean I guess it's essentially the same scenario. Yeah. I'll be super stunned if the Sixers figure out a way to win this game on Thursday night.